Hi, everybody. Everybody knows Jack, so I thought I'd start with just asking Jack to tell us the story of how he got to the inception of Clio.
Sure. So it started around 2007, and my background's computer science. A lot of people mistakenly assume maybe that I'm a lawyer by training, but my background's computer science, did a master's degree in machine learning at the University of Alberta. Came this close to heading to the U of T to do my PhD under Jeff Hinton, actually, which would have been a weird alternate timeline for my life. That could have maybe worked out even better than Clio, but I decided instead to go into industry. And my first experience was working for a U of A spin-off company called Kinomics, and it was a life sciences company. I got hired as software developer number one there by one of my profs at the U of A. And I got to go through the whole experience of learning how to build a product, learning how to fundraise, and building a company, and saw the company go from 4 people when I joined to around 25 people when I left 5 years later. I worked my way up to being eventually the director of product management there, and decided around 2007, I'm ready for my own thing. I kind of became the number 2 to the CEO over that journey, but decided I wanted to do my own thing. And this brings us to 2007, which is where the light bulb for Clio went off. I phoned up Ryan Govro, my co-founder at Clio. He and I had met each other when we were 8 years old in grade 3. So we're childhood best friends. We're fast friends through junior high school. And we met in Edmonton, my hometown. And Ryan, in the meantime, had moved to Vancouver, did his undergrad and eventually his MBA here in Vancouver, and had become the IT manager at a law firm called Gowlings, that's one of Canada's biggest law firms. And in 2007, what was really obvious to me at the time was the cloud was starting to emerge as really like a transformative change in computing. And we saw this massive shift from on-prem to the cloud, and it was a disruptive wave of technology innovation. And I phoned up Ryan, and I was like, hey, this cloud thing sounds ridiculous and obvious in 2025. But in 2007, this was prescient, saying cloud's going to be big, it's going to transform every industry, and what industry should we go after? And Ryan at the time was working at Gowlings and basically said, well, look, I work with lawyers all day long, and they're not using technology at all. The technology they do have sucks, it's bad software, and maybe legal would be the opportunity. So we really quickly honed in on legal as the opportunity, and realized that market was really dramatically underserved with the solutions at the time. The other thing we realized about the market was, number one, Ryan and I were both, outsiders to the legal industry proper. Ryan was also a technologist and a more of a business background. What we didn't appreciate was, number one, how big the industry is. Worldwide, there's about $1 trillion of spend on legal services every year. And we didn't realize how SMB the market is. I think a lot of people from outside legal assume, like we did at the time, that every lawyer is like Harvey Specter in suits and practicing in a big fancy law firm in a fancy downtown office space. And the reality is that 80% of all lawyers practice in firms of 10 lawyers or less, and half of all lawyers practice as solos. And what was interesting to us at the time was, the customer acquisition cost of that segment was so high that virtually every software company focused on that enterprise market, on the Harvey Specters of the world. And we realized that, hey, if we just focused on the solos and small firms, we could capture 80% of the market. And we realized the cloud was a really disruptive and transformative way of accessing that market and dramatically lowering the customer acquisition costs. And when we interviewed customers in this segment, we realized that the need for software was really high. The cloud distribution model of just, hey, it's a monthly utility fee, just sign up and you're off and running, was really attractive to that segment. And so we got to work. We rolled up our sleeves. We started coding furiously for about 6 or 7 months. Got our beta out the door in March of 2008. Got a bunch of feedback and launched the product officially in October of 2008.
Got you.
And here we are today. That's the story.
So I guess a question on that, and you've said it, law firms don't necessarily sound like an obvious place for early cloud adoption, right?
Yeah.
But it sounds like you went out there, you spoke to customers, you looked at the fragmentation or segmentation of the industry. Did you find that customer uptake initially was tough? Or did you find that you just found a pocket of the industry that was willing to try?
Well, this was definitely the single biggest bet I think that we had to make in 2008, which was, in a nutshell, would lawyers ever get their heads wrapped around the idea of storing data in the cloud?
Right.
And this was far from obvious in 2008. It's thankfully something that I think has become table stakes in 2025. But in 2008, just to set the context for some of the people in the room that might not have been born in 2007, the first iPhone was just released in 2007. Dropbox was released in 2008. So this was like just the beginning of the cloud era proper, right? Yeah. So, the idea of going into your average law firm and saying you're going to trust me. And you're going to store your data, in the what was called the public cloud at the time. Right. What was just a real leap of faith. And the audacious thing we said in 2008 that I think rings true today is your data is safer in our cloud than it is in your on-premise system. And for the vast majority of law firms, that's certainly the case. You look at most, like the average solo small firm at the time would have an unpatched Windows 98 server sitting in their broom closet, hooked up right to the internet with no firewall, right? Like running all their practice management software. So they were already probably compromised by the time they got on the phone with us. And we're trying to make really persuasive case that you're way further ahead as a lawyer, trusting a third party that can invest in security and investing in the infrastructure than you are trying to run this stuff yourself. I think that learning we had really early on was a lot of the incumbents in the space realized that they were at risk, that we were going to eat their lunch if they didn't try to kill us. So very early on, 2008, 2009, they would launch these organized campaigns to basically spread fear, uncertainty, and doubt, or FUD campaigns around the cloud. They would try to seed this with bar associations and try to steer regulation towards the cloud basically being disallowed for lawyers. And we realized very early on that we could either get dragged along by this narrative or we could try to lead it. So we very rapidly, in 2009, very early in our journey, started writing white papers on the security and ethics of cloud computing for lawyers. We started trying to get invited to any conference we could to speak about the security and ethics of cloud computing for lawyers. We would attend Bar Association ethics committee meetings about this stuff and actually helped shape the very first ethics opinion on cloud computing ever to come out of the North Carolina State Bar that really helped set the precedent for the rest of the US. And thankfully, we helped steer the ethics opinion from what was initially very anti-cloud to being pro-cloud. So I think that was one of the very early bets we had to make, but certainly when we were pitching early investors and when I heard the hundreds of no's to our pitch in 2008, 2009, the refrain, basically I heard two things. Lawyers will never store their data in the cloud. You guys will die. You will die on this hill. Sure. Or the legal TAM is so small. You guys will never build a big business here. You will never build a 100 million ARR business here. Those were the two common refrains we heard from VCs at that time. So
this is an interesting thread, something I wanted to ask you about later, but since we're here, how did you think about fundraising? Because obviously the market, and I mean the fundraising market, wasn't immediately jumping on legal TAM and moving lawyers to the cloud at that time. You had to grow your team. You had to be thoughtful about that. You had to get your voice out. You had to represent the industry in what sounds like a very unique way. So how did you think about capitalize the company at that time?
Well, I mean, all the kind of macro stuff about legal and legal tech being, very immature industry, being regarded as too small, was layered on top of this being 2008, 2009, which was the depths of the global financial crisis. So for anyone that thinks, there's been a tough fundraising environment in the last decade, I didn't try to fundraise in 2008, 2009. This was a time period where, sophisticated VCs were legitimately worried that the economic system that we were depending on would collapse, right? And I remember on the way to one of our VC pitches, Ryan and I were walking through the airport, and the cover of The Economist was a picture of all the big bank logos in the US circling a drain. Oh, wow. It was like Bear Stearns and JP Morgan, and the headline was, "When will it end?" And I was like, what a perfect time to be trying to raise money. So we heard like probably the most frustrating feedback a founder could hear when they're pitching, which is, "We love this pitch. That was a great deck. That's one of the best pitches we've ever seen. We love you guys. The idea is amazing. We're just not writing checks right now." We're just, they had a more sophisticated way of saying it, but they basically were saying, we're just scared as hell right now, and we're just not writing checks. And so, I wish I had a better story of how we persevered through all of this, but it really ended up being a bit of a Deus ex machina kind of story where this random guy in Germany named Christoph Jans emailed me and Ryan in late 2008, sent an email to info@goclio.com, which is our domain at the time. Subject line was interested in investing in Clio. The from address was cjans@web.de. And the body of the email was, hey, Jack and Ryan, I just read about Clio on a blog called Web 2.0 Central, which was run by a guy named Reg Charami, a friend of mine in Edmonton. And as far as I know, Christoph may have been the only person that read Reg's blog. And Reg had written this article about Clio. And so Christoph starts off his email saying, I read about Clio on Web 2.0 Central. I just sold my company, Page Flakes, and I've now become an angel investor. I just invested in a company, a small company here in Europe called Zendesk. And he invested in Zendesk when it was 4 guys in a chain smoking in a bar in Copenhagen. And I'd love to make Clio my second investment. And so this email, Ryan and I were using an early version of Google Apps at the time. And Google's innovative new spam filter sent that email straight to spam because I think, it had all the signals, right? Like weird domain name, sounded a bit like a Nigerian email scam. And so what's great though is this email sits in our spam folder for 2 weeks. We inadvertently slow play Christoph, and he follows up in 2 weeks and is like, "Hey guys, I'm sure you're getting a ton of investor demand. But I'd just love, if you guys would give me a few minutes on a phone call." And then in what I can only describe as an act of God, Ryan was on some long customer support call and decided to look in his spam folder and was like, I wonder what's in my spam folder. I don't think he's ever done that since, and I don't think he'd ever done it before, but he finds this email from Christoph, forwards it to me and says, "This looks legit. Do you want to follow up with him?" And I followed up with him. Sure enough, it was legit. And a few months later, Ryan and I were on a plane to Berlin to meet Christoph and shake hands and raise our first $1 million in Clio. So, and then I think that, it showed to me, and for anyone that's in the early stages of fundraising, the first $1 million of fundraising is definitely the hardest. We were scrimping and saving. I'd maxed out credit cards. I'd done all the founder tropes. I'd remortgaged my house. We had lines of credit secured against my house. We had raised, a few $100,000 from friends and family over those first 18 months, but we were really kind of at the limits of what we could raise and generate from our immediate circles and credit lines. But that $1 million investment from Christoph and a few other angels that joined in at that point just really helped gather a lot of momentum around the business. And then we were able to raise eventually our Series B and Series C, and most recently our Series F, a lot more easily, obviously. So we got traction and we exited the toughest fundraising environment that has probably existed in the last 20 years.
Wow, it's a great story. And just for those who don't know, the last round that Clio raised at $900 million, I believe, was the largest investment in a private SaaS company ever in Canada.
Yeah, and just to be clear, we raised $900 million on a $3 billion valuation. And that's, I think it was the largest transaction in Canadian fundraising history.
Yeah, unreal. Maybe switching gears a little bit, like that early time, obviously a lot going on. At that time, you're still building the team. You're still attracting people to what you're doing. Talk to me a little bit about that early team. Who was on it beyond you and Ryan, and how did you get those people on board? Because obviously you weren't paying them extremely well,
no,
if at all.
Yeah, well, the early team, I look back and I think one of the conclusions I've made about our success at Clio is we were maybe skilled, maybe lucky, but that first 10 people we hired were just the most incredible people I think we could have ever hoped to bring onto the team. And you hear, I've heard this at different startup forums, and I think it's absolutely true, but you hear different numbers, it's the first 5 or the first 10 or the first 15, but getting those first couple of handful of hires right matters so much. And we got incredibly lucky. I mean, we posted to a Ruby on Rails dev hiring forum and found Thijs van Gaza, who I think is like a uniquely talented software developer, like a generational talent. And he just reached out and was like, hey guys, my startup just failed. I love startups. I'd love to work for your startup. And we're like, cool. Like, would you accept substandard pay and options that'll probably be worth nothing? And he was like, yes. So, finding those kind of people but also like, he was so instrumental in shaping our culture and shaping our team. Catherine Hillier, our first support hire, another great example of just a, absolutely transformative, high impact employee. George Saharis, who is a Vancouver native that was initially our BD manager and eventually grew up to be our chief operating officer, and has just taken on the CEO role at Thought Exchange here in town. Wow. Had a 10-year journey with us and just had a huge amount of impact over that journey. So I think making sure that you understand those first 10 hires are gonna shape the culture of your company forevermore. That's really true. Like I see echoes of that culture that was formed in Clio in those first few years with those first 10 employees, carrying through to today. And that's where your values come from. That's where everything that makes your culture gets shaped. So I think getting those first hires right, and look, those first hires came from far and wide. We were growing so fast and experiencing so much demand. I remember coming home from work one day, coming home was coming up from the basement. And my brother was over and he was just in the process of wrapping up a master's degree in math. And I was like, hey, Fraser, do you want to work for Clio? Because we're bursting at the seams and we could really use some extra help. And he's been a hugely impactful contributor to the team, and 15 years later is still with the company and running a chunk of our data science team today. So you can get that talent from anywhere, but the number one thing is making sure that it's additive to your culture, and that when you're looking at those very first hires, it's reflecting back what you want to see in your company culture.
On this note, like, it's no secret, right? I think Clio's been named one of Canada's best managed companies for the last 7 years in a row, if I have that right. You've been named CEO of the Year in a bunch of different forums. It sounds like this foundation you laid with the first set of hires was really important to that. A lot of startups that go to scale up, many investors talk about getting those experienced hires in the door. Yeah. Bringing in that external talent as you scale. How did you guys manage through that? Like, because it sounds like a lot of folks who were with you earlier still there today and grew up with the company, but I imagine you did have to add from the outside as you grew.
Yeah, I think there's two places you get that guidance and expertise. One is external through your investors and through the mentorship network you can build both from your investor base and outside of your investor base. So using Christoph again as an early example in the Clio story, Christoph had invested in Zendesk when they were early, but they were still probably 2 or 3 years ahead of Clio in their growth trajectory.
Right.
So, when we were a 10 million ARR business, they were, a 50 or 100 million ARR business. And I remember what being so important and valuable in those days was, it was the early days of SaaS, and it was almost, and by the way, like what I see from a pattern recognition standpoint right now is how much similarity there is with AI and the cloud. And, in the same way, like in 2007, 2008, you didn't have Jason Lemkin or David Skoke or any of those guys blogging about SaaS metrics and LTV to CAC ratios and what's optimal and CAC payback periods and all this stuff. Like SaaS and SaaS metrics and how to think about SaaS as a business was like an oral tradition, And I remember sitting in a bar with like, who was there again? It was Nicholas Fain from Zendesk, and it was the CTO of HubSpot and the CEO of FreshBooks at the time, and Mike McDermott, and just a whole bunch of us, and everyone was just kind of like trading notes on how they thought about their business. Because again, like the old world of thinking about financial statements in a traditional way wasn't the way you thought about a SaaS business. And you really deliberately ran a SaaS business in the red because your customer acquisition costs dictated that you did that to a certain point, and how did you kind of govern that and everything else. So it was a very interesting, like I said, almost oral tradition of information being passed around before this got disseminated in a really broad way. So that investor network and having investors that have companies that are 1 or 2 stages down the growth journey from you gives you someone to draft behind. Like you can just understand, like, here's how it's done. Here's some of the bets they made. Here's some of the bets that worked out. Here's some of the bets that didn't. So investors would be one huge resource there. And then looking to investors that have portfolio companies that look like you, that you want to be when you grow up. Yeah. And then you can go talk to those CEOs. You can recruit those CEOs to your board or your advisory council and make sure they're, a resource to you going forward. I think that's hugely valuable. And then, so that's kind of the external piece. And then the internal piece is your management team. And I think this is something I did not appreciate until, probably 10 years into the Clio journey. But in the first 10 years, I was very hesitant to hire seasoned executive talent. And I think it was, some of it was just being penny wise but pound foolish. Like I couldn't get my head around this idea that you'd pay, $250,000, $500,000 a year, plus a whole bunch of equity to, VP of sales, for example. Right. And now I look at it and think, man, I was a fucking idiot. Like if you hire a great VP of sales for $500,000 a year plus a whole bunch of equity, if they're doing a great job, they will pay that back so many times over that, it's absolutely the right thing to do to bring that executive on. Now you need to hold them to a super high bar, and you need to make sure they're living up to that outcome and they're driving the results. But hiring, especially when, like me and Ryan, we were 2 young guys with no idea of how to build a business, how to scale business, how to build a sales team, any of these things. And when you're trying to create this stuff in a vacuum and try to build it from scratch, you just realize, like, you're going to stumble your way through in the darkness, and hopefully figure it out over time, but you're probably going to make a bunch of mistakes on the way. And some of those mistakes might be fatal.
Right.
And you hire the right kind of executive. They can see around corners. They've been there, done that, and they have a playbook. Now, the caveat I've learned as well is you don't want to hire the executive that is a one-trick pony, or a one-trick Tony. You don't want either of those. And yeah, and there's Tony, who is a one-trick pony. But you don't want those execs that are just like, hey, here's my playbook, and I'm going to run it exactly the way I've run it in my last 5 companies at your company. Like, I think what you want is an executive that realizes I'm going to have to adapt a playbook. Things are going to look a little bit different here. History does not repeat itself, but it does rhyme. Yeah. And I can help accelerate what would have happened, maybe in 5 years and make that happen in 2 years because of the experience I've got. And you want somebody that has hopefully seen exactly the scaling journey you're about to go through. So one mistake I made was, hiring a senior exec from Salesforce, that was running like $1 billion P&L. Different context. And just, you need somebody that is actually, like, if you're I'm scaling from $50 to $100 million, somebody that's been through exactly that journey and maybe the next step beyond, right, and can help you, again, avoidable scar tissue, help see around corners, help make decisions faster, help hire the right people from their network, and just compress what you might have stumbled your way through in 5 years and get it done in 2 years or 1 year even. So bringing on that right executive talent, that's seen the right stage of the journey, that fits in with your culture, and has been at a company of roughly your stage and scale, is so additive. And if I could go back, there's not many things that I say, hey, if I could rewind the clock, I would do this differently, because things have worked out really well. And I think the way things work out are a function of both your successes and what feel like your mistakes. Okay. But if I could go back and give myself some advice in 2008, I think saying, hiring more senior executive talent earlier, being willing to write those big paychecks, as painful as they see them at the time, would have helped us probably achieve more in less time.
And was there a breakthrough moment or a breakthrough executive who kind of came in and showed you the way?
Yeah, I think we hired a really great, I mentioned one VP sales from Salesforce that was kind of a failure to launch. We hired another VP from Salesforce that really helped set up our sales team and built our first sales team out of Toronto. And again, I remember looking at his salary and equity demands and wincing at them, but swallowing hard and saying, okay, let's take a swing at this. Let's take a swing at building an inside sales team. And, in the space of the year, built out our first sales team in Toronto, really started building some momentum around that sales team. And, now, it's incredible just planting that seed. Our Toronto office just earlier this month, and it's got the majority of our sales and marketing talent in it, became the largest Clio office, edging out our Burnaby office just in January. So that investment has really compounded and succeeded. But now we've recruited executives that have worked at places like Uber, and executives from Shopify, and they bring different dimensions of expertise to the table. But again, seeing that story of, they've seen the story from 300 million to $1 billion of ARR and beyond, and we're helping accelerate our story.
Yeah, and there you're teasing a bit of a preview. Maybe just give us kind of, as we start to get to close here, a view on where you see the business going. And you've talked a little bit about the SaaS revolution or evolution. We're now in a new phase of software development. So how do you look at kind of the future of Clio and legal technology in general? That would be a great way, I think, to close.
Yeah. I mentioned the chapter we're on right now. So Clio today is about a 300 million US ARR business. We're growing rapidly and see $1 billion of ARR as the next major milestone. Okay. So, it's a really interesting milestone to be thinking about, because it's not going to come easily, and it's not going to come without a lot of deliberate effort and strategy for how we build towards that. So one major evolution we've gone through over the course of the last couple of years is moving from being a single product company to a multi-product company. We're continuing to go deeper into the value we're delivering law firms, and have expanded our product suite from what we used to do, which was really focused narrowly on time and billing and helping lawyers manage every aspect of their business, to them managing everything from acquiring clients, knowing where to deploy their marketing spend, how to convert leads to clients, how to manage those clients, helping streamline the document drafting process. Now we're helping integrate AI into the document drafting process. We've built tools to help lawyers collaborate more seamlessly with their clients over the internet as well. So I would say our broader ambition has moved from, let's build a practice management system that helps lawyers run a more efficient law firm, to let's transform the legal industry. Let's move the legal industry from its very bricks and mortar and on-premise roots to the cloud. And if you look at what lawyers do and what legal service delivery looks like, why do you need, a fancy AAA office space in downtown Vancouver? I think most lawyers would prefer to work from home or work from a WeWork or some place that's, more convenient to them. Most clients would prefer to access legal services from their home, their laptop, their smartphone, and all of that should be happening on the internet. Now, there are some high stakes and appropriate uses for, in-person legal work, but the majority of it's going to happen on the internet, and we want Clio to be the operating system for all of that legal work that's happening. You mentioned AI, and maybe just to close out on our thoughts for that opportunity. One of the questions we got in raising the Series F was, hey, like Clio's seen a lot of success historically.
Yeah.
Is AI going to automate lawyers into oblivion? And are you guys going to be left with a TAM of 0 essentially, because lawyers' work is being done by AI? And our view is actually very much the opposite. We see AI as being a huge enabling technology for lawyers that will increase the amount of demand for legal services, because AI will increase the accessibility of legal services. So one of the patterns we've seen in many of these technological revolutions, you could look at it, whether it's the mechanical loom or the assembly line for the automobile, but you get these technologies that make people more productive, and it drives down the cost of the goods and services that they're producing, because they can produce them more efficiently. And then as the cost of those goods and services goes down, the demand for those goods and services goes up, because more people can access them. And legal services, there's an access to justice crisis right now. And a statistic we cite all the time at Clio is a World Justice Project statistic that 77% of legal services are not addressed by lawyers today. So 77% of the demand for legal services does not get met with a resolution serviced by a lawyer. So what happens to 77% of that demand? People don't see a good legal outcome. They try to solve the problem themselves. They inevitably end up losing in some material way. And we see the opportunity for AI is really dramatically increasing the productivity of lawyers, dramatically reducing the cost of accessing legal services, even helping connect consumers with lawyers that can help them. Because again, anyone that's dealt with lawyers in the room know that it's expensive, it's intimidating, it's so intimidating that most people don't even pick up the phone to call a lawyer. What's shocking is in our legal trends report work that we do every year, if you phone a lawyer or email a lawyer, over half of those inquiries go unanswered. So even getting a lawyer to pick up the phone is more difficult than it should be. And we see this all as a technology problem. And we're really excited about the opportunity for Clio, through innovating in technology, innovating in AI, to give lawyers essentially superpowers, and then for them to ultimately service that dramatic access to justice gap. And that access to justice gap, that 77% of legal demand that's not met today, I really see as, from an entrepreneurial perspective, a real opportunity for lawyers and law firms that think innovatively. How do I tap into that demand? How do I tap into that market? And again, earlier I said the legal market's $1 trillion a year of spend, and that's only the 23% of demand that's serviced today. Right. That represents $1 trillion a year of spend. So, do the math. There's a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity out there for lawyers, law firms, and innovators in the legal space to think about, how do I leverage AI? How do I leverage technology to price and package innovative legal services for that latent legal market? Right. So that's the next decade for Clio.
Oh, that's great.
And we're pretty excited about it.
Thanks for sharing that. You obviously convinced a few people that to get behind.
Yeah, people are jazzed about that idea.
Well, I think, look, privilege for me to sit down and talk to you today, Jack. Thank you. Hopefully everybody enjoyed the conversation. One thing we didn't get to, but I think is worth saying, is to my knowledge, you've been a huge supporter of ecosystems.
Yes,
and supporting and paying it forward. And I told you a personal story I had with an entrepreneur I know really well with you.
Yeah.
And so I think on behalf of the ecosystem, I just want to thank you for that.
Yeah.
Are we opening up to questions from the crowd? Okay, so I think we're tight on time. Sorry, everyone. I asked too many questions. But thank you very much, Jack.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, everyone.